Okay, so what we're doing is we are going to look at how design has changed and grown over the last few years. Many of the examples that you guys just looked at are connected to the Democrats. I apologize again for the lack of representation of the Republicans, but they really haven't done much in design, so it's hard to find anything that's really documented that discusses their work. I promise I did look hardcore to try to find something for you, and I just could not. But hopefully I found enough different variations that you can at least discuss some of the things that have happened. So to kind of give you some background information before we move forward, Obama, his first campaign was really the first time you saw design, graphic design being implemented successfully in campaign ads and campaign paraphernalia. Prior to that date, you really saw the generic, here's my 3 bars of color and my name sign on everything. And you didn't really see the employment of branding to the level that is now occurring. So Obama's campaign was kind of like this trigger point in design. Since then, the Democrats have pushed design and branding as one of their big platforms. And part of that's because if you look at the demographic the Democrats are attacking, right? They're trying to grab the younger demographics. Those are the people that respond to the different branding and things like that. And they recognize that. They recognize that there's value in putting in design. And so that's some of it. And that's some of why the Democratic campaigns, you've seen it push for redesign constantly. But what I did was I pulled 5 articles. The 5 articles discussed different design trends and ideas that happened throughout. And you guys in your pairs just kind of read the articles and you're providing a quick summary of what's happening, some imagery and things like that, so that we're all kind of on the same page as we move forward. Because our goal eventually will be to design our own little like mailer and ad branding package that works for one of the candidates in North Carolina. And so knowing that, we want to make sure that we understand, you know, who has pushed the limits of design, because a lot of the mailing things that you receive in the mail right now aren't necessarily representative of what we see across the country. So the first, and if I go to your slide and it's not showing how you want it to, let me know and I'll like refresh the page so it shows correctly. So the first one, Ramisa and Brenda, you guys looked at the 2020. So the different thing about this year was that the Democratic National Convention was online. So whereas the Republicans held it still kind of like in person, the Democrats went to online branding and online messaging. And so that was very different in how they had to work. As a result, they created a full package of graphics that were developed to support the campaign needs. And as Brenda said, in the past, you would see logos like she has over here on the left side. You logo this, one of the original Democratic National Convention logos, followed by a 2016 where it represents the city that it's in. But now we don't have the city, and so what do we do? And so they started rebranding a package of graphics that could be used, and you can see a big shift in representation. They're using flat design, they're using the solid colors, they're using simplistic icons, and so you're seeing all of that start to pop up, and they're trending with how we see current day. The other issue that they had is that when the Democratic Convention was created, they didn't know who their candidate would be. So they could not use Biden as their kind of symbol behind the package. And so as a result, they made very simplistic graphics that could be then adjusted for whoever might be running the campaign at that time. But as I've said, it has a modern look. It's a bold sans serif typography. It fits in with current day trends. And it's way more dynamic now than it was. Okay, so we saw a big shift from even 2016 on in the Democratic National Convention. And you can actually almost see some of the Obama logo mentality kind of coming through here. You can see pieces of what he created originally that year and how it's kind of grown and infiltrated itself back into their design. Okay, so who's Pete? So Pete was one of the first people that said, hey, let me give everybody my graphics and then let them create their own signs that support me. And so what he did was he created a style package essentially where you could pull all of these different pieces of his graphics and build your own signs, build your own things. So he essentially gave the tools to the community to build brands and advertise for him. He's one of the first to consider that as an option. And you can see that he did go, as Andrew said, against party colors. And that we're seeing more and more. There's so much division over party colors that a lot of people are thinking about shifting their design colors so that they don't necessarily associate so specifically with a party that somebody turns away from them immediately. And so we're seeing a lot of shift from the red and blue, and we're starting to see these other colors be incorporated in design. Perfect. So she switched her colors out. Though she used red and blue, this yellow color became really prominent. And what you find is that that is a really prominent color used in specific design. And so she capitalized on that. And it's kind of from this Shirley Chisholm's campaign, this first Black woman elected to any Congress. And so she fed off of that. Which, you know, a lot of people don't connect to directly, but subconsciously you make a lot of these connections, especially like if you think about somebody that was alive during that time. So though you may not connect, she's connecting specifically to other people that would know of that campaign and know those designs. But yeah, her campaign was straight and to the point. She developed this short slogan. She developed this "you can't argue" kind of statement. And so that's why she had some success there. Though she isn't running for president anymore, she's VP. I mean, that's still a major feat to have gained. Okay, no problem. Okay, so yeah, so Kevin and Ryan, what this article talks about, and actually this article has a really cool link in it, which I will show you also. Should have a cool link in it. It has a link to this Center for American Politics and Design. And when you click on it, it has like a never-ending amounts of logos and campaign connections, brands that have been built, which is really neat to just kind of look at. So if you have some time in the next couple days as we begin advertising, this might be a good place to kind of just look around and see what's been developed, see how they're developing it, what hierarchies being used, the colors. I mean, it's never ending. You can also like filter it by specific things. I don't think there's any North Carolina information in here, just for the record. Or maybe there is. Oh yeah, there is North Carolina. So you can look at like North Carolina based graphics. You can like filter it by color, look at just like specific colors used, things like that, and kind of play around with it. So it's a pretty cool little site. Okay. So back to what they were talking about, we see that purple is a common color used, but it's mostly used for women candidates, not men. And that though red is considered the Republican Party color, blue is actually the most commonly used, most versatile color. So though red might give you the connotation of Republicans because red's a hard color to work with, so it's really only being used by Republicans, the Democrats don't own blue. Blue is actually just kind of associated with all different things, which is just kind of an interesting concept. They didn't find that there was much connection between serif or sans serif fonts per Republican or Democrats. However, with the new designs that have been breaking out, we do see a lot of sans serif design coming out of the Democrats, and that's just because they are trying to trend with the modern shift. One of the big things about campaigns is that if you can connect to something like this that Americans are used to seeing, they remember you. And so we see a lot of this kind of mirroring, especially in smaller campaigns, mirroring brands that exist for real purchase and shifting out to your name and things like that in it. So we see a lot of that happening with smaller campaigns. Okay, and then Bernie Sanders and socialism. So Bernie starts to break the barriers between socialism and there's always this edge of far left Democrat edges into socialism. And so Bernie's seen as a socialist, but he keeps wanting to run as a Democrat. And so how does he break that barrier? Some of it's a visual barrier. And so what you see, and I think there's some examples in this article, here we go. This is what socialism posters tended to look like in the past. And so you see, a strong, a lot of type, a lot of breakdown of this. Now, this is a newer socialistic poster, but you can see this big, bold type, all of this information. It's usually got harsh angles being used in it, and it speaks a specific language. So to break that barrier, for Bernie to say, I'm not socialist, I really want to give you all this information, but I'm not socialist, he starts to mimic a lot of the styles that you see inside the Democratic convention. But they're very conscientious about the coloring that they're using. They don't want the colors to push people back to thinking that he's Russian, essentially. And so they're really intelligent about their choices that they make. And this article also, I don't know if it will gives you like the renditions of like them creating the logo, like his main name, which I think is kind of cool to look at. But I do want to point out that if you have some time when we start developing, it would be beneficial to you to go and check out these different articles, look at the imagery. AIGA is the design association, a professional design association for graphic designers. They've done a great job on these articles and talking through in common language the choices that were made, on top of showing the graphics that go along with the statements that they're making. So I highly suggest you click into these different articles and kind of look at them to wrap your brain around kind of where design is headed or been heading over the last few years. So what do we need to consider when designing election advertising? Because that's what we're going to be doing. You're going to be creating election advertising, essentially. And for your project, you'll be creating a mailer and you'll be creating an online ad. And so what types of things need to be considered? We are going to, there's two of them. Okay, you're going to take a minute and look at these two links. And while you're looking at them, I want you to think about what are the things we need to keep in mind as we're making our ads. So as we start to build, there's kind of like rules, top 10 rules to design. Now, some of the arguments are around ballot design. There's been a lot of talk about ballots being designed poorly, and that's causing people to vote improperly and things like that. We're not going to touch ballot design. That's another complicated world. But we're going to use these two conversations that are happening in these two articles to discuss things we need to keep in mind. And while you're looking, what we're going to do is we are going to add on here to design points to remember. So as you find something, you can verbally say it and I'll type it. As you find something that we want to remember as we're designing, we need to write it down. And so, hold on. I actually just need to get out of the presentation and then pop back over. Okay, so while you're looking at those articles, you can write yourself. Some of you are in here and you can just type. Others of you that are not in here, we're going to be clicking on design points to remember. If you're not in here, you can just verbally or type it in the chat. What is something you see that we need to keep in mind as we build our ads? So thinking about those two articles, what are some things that we need to keep in mind? So if you're on the PowerPoint, you're welcome to type right in there. If you're not, you can type in the chat or verbally tell me and I will type it on here. Okay, I think you guys nailed most of them. So here's the thing. What is different when you're designing something like this versus when you're designing just something to look cool or to advertise a poster or advertise like a concert or something like that is that the attention span of your consumer is super short. So as a voting person right now, I'm getting 3 to 4 mailers a day. And I can guarantee you that I am literally, and I'm interested in the design side of things, so I might be looking a little bit longer. But for the most part, I'm spending 5 to 10 seconds on a mailer. That is not a lot of time. So you have to grab my attention immediately. You also have to make the information extremely accessible, more so than you would normally do. So this is why it's really important that you keep in mind these bottom 3 things that a lot of you grabbed. You have to use lowercase letters. That means you're using a letter, and I think you guys can see me. Tell me if you can't see me. Can you see this thing that I'm holding up? Yes. Okay. So you can see the big type at the bottom, right? It's upper and lowercase. It's sentence type. Your brain actually doesn't read letters. It reads word shape. So when you put everything in all caps, it takes longer for your brain to read it, even though you don't realize it. So in a situation like this, where you're dealing with a really short attention span, you need to make sure that you're using those lower letters so that you get a word shape that people can read instantly. It's a really weird way that your brain works. But if you are in all caps, a lot of times you're missing that. And that's why when you start looking at people's brands, for the most part, you will find that they do not do their names in all caps. They're always putting their names in sentence caps, upper and lowercase letters. No center type, it's the same situation about reading. So you as a person, you as a English reader, you read left to right. And so if you put your stuff in centered type, it's harder for you to read. So again, to decrease reading time, you need everything to be left aligned, not right aligned, left aligned, which is, what you see here, your normal reading order, like when you read a book. And it's about starting point. And how your brain works, how you learn to read. Obviously, if you're in a different country, that reading order could shift. But the way we read in America, we read left to right. And so that left alignment becomes really important. Quality over quantity really matters in general. So let me show you. I've got like a bunch of them here. I'm sure you have them all over your house, or at least in your recycling bin. I guess I'll use this one. I'd argue that this is probably not great quality, but they're decent cutouts, I guess. But it becomes overwhelming to look at. They've got so much imagery happening right now that it is super overwhelming. And same on the back. They have a lot of different typefaces and things like that. As a result, I don't want to read it. I throw it away. Now they're trying to create a specific feel, and we're gonna take a closer look at these things on Thursday. They're trying to create a specific, like, Joe Biden's gonna destroy the world type of feel, and they do that through the color and the graphic work and whatever else. But the insanity of the mailer makes it so that I don't want to read it. Thinking about hierarchy becomes really important. Making sure that your message is super clear and you're using simple language, and that it's got quality over quantity. That means that a piece like this that's using a quality photograph, I don't know if Mark is a Democrat or a Republican, for the record, I have no idea. But it's a quality photograph, okay? They're using a little bit of type to call out, a big statement at the bottom. It's organized. They're using white space. It makes me want to stay here and look at it for a second. And maybe I want to read the back. At least the writing is clear and easily addressed. So like there's potential here versus here where I kind of want to run away because it's just so crazy to look at. So really thinking about that hierarchy and that control, less is more situation. So I think that you guys nailed a lot of those points. The last things we want to think about are these kind of 2 things that I've gathered from our social studies teachers that are more versed in election than I am. Some other considerations to just kind of keep in mind. We need to always be mindful that our attention spans are super short. Statements have to be succinct. You're not going to have lots of room for information. Your people are going to respond to fear and spectacle. They tend to, like when you hear the radio ads, people are afraid. They want to like make everybody sound like they're going to end the world and destroy the United States, no matter which party you're on. And so people respond to that. So kind of keeping that in mind. Name recognition is the most important. People vote for you just based on recognizing that they've seen your name someplace. And so that's why you see the excessive use of signage across the highways, and sometimes where when you go near a voting place, they'll have like 15 of the same sign repeated in hopes that you forget about the other people and you only recognize that name. And many, if not most, TV advertising is actually not produced by the candidate. And so a PAC, a political action committee, they don't have the same restrictions as candidates have. They can produce things that slander other people and whatever else. And so they have a little bit more flexibility in their advertising than we have when we create, because we're going to be creating as a candidate. So we're going to be creating very honest campaigns that promote our candidate rather than defensive attacking campaigns that a lot of the PACs create. Just a disclaimer, okay? There is a disclaimer that has to be placed on every single ad or mailing piece that gets produced during the election. So every piece of advertising has to have a disclaimer. In printed ads, it has to be 12-point font, and it has to be high contrast. So you can't drop like black type on blue backgrounds and think that it's going to get away with high contrast. So you have to be able to read the disclaimer really well. And it's always here. It essentially tells you who is making the campaign, who's making the mailer. So if you look at this one, it says, who's making this one? Oh, this one is a disclaimer that the photographs in the uniform do not apply endorsement by the Department of Defense by the Marine Corps. It's made by Cavaliero for Senate, which is his campaign versus somebody else's. So you'll see, it takes a minute to sometimes find it, but you'll see who is actually creating it because they have to have that disclaimer on there. And it will be like paid for by whatever. And you hear it a lot of times when you're listening to the radio or something like that. You'll hear paid for by the Trump campaign or whatever it might be. So that disclaimer is going to be built onto all of our ads.